Welcome to Season 2 of the Hidden Philanthropist podcast, proudly presented by the Purdie Foundation. Join us as we uncover the art of giving back.
Listeners, our mission and intent with the Hidden Philanthropist was to explore philanthropy in all its forms and give you an insight into the myriad of ways you can give back to your community. We also wanted to explore how those from all walks of life, with many different types of experiences, can find themselves in a position where they can support, guide and assist those in need, and who can indeed provide a voice for survivors. Russell Manser, you are a diamond in the rough, and he's here to share his hard-hitting and heartbreaking story and how he found his way. Please note this podcast discusses serious issues of sexual abuse and drug addiction which may cause distress. The Voice of a Survivor assists victims of institutional abuse. Call them on 1300 863 509 if you need to talk to someone who understands. The prison system had you written off with guards saying that you were less than 1 in a million chances of ever changing. You said you're a good guy who just did some bad things. 23 years of your life in prison would tell me that you're either real good or real bad at it, but you did plenty of bad things.
Yeah.
A former armed robber, a drug addict, and a victim of institutional child sex abuse. You were quoted as saying that you won't let your past define you, and thank God you didn't. You're the host of the Stick Up podcast. You have a book and a business called The Voice of a Survivor, and you, mate, are the voice of a survivor. Welcome to the Hidden Philanthropist, Russell Manser.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate you guys. I love your setup, and man, I'm really looking forward to this one.
Mate, super cool having you on. And unconventionally, I sort of touched on before we started that usually I do my research on a guest, but I bumped into you. We crossed paths at a charity night recently,
Yep.
and we'd had a mutual...
Mick Gatto's chatter in Autism Charity. It was a great night.
It was a ripper night, and we'd had a mutual guest on our podcast,
Charlie Teo, champion.
So I started talking to you, and you told me a bit about your story. And I got home that night, and I'm like, because the snippet you told me was, and I'm like, this dude's full on and doing amazing things. But I'm like, who is this maniac? So I Googled you, started reading a bit about your journey, and I'm like, mate, I have to have you on my podcast.
Yeah.
So I started doing a little bit of research. I found a podcast that you were actually on, and I only listened to the start of it, and I got probably half an hour. The podcast went for like 2 hours, I think the interview went for 2 hours. I got about 20 minutes, half an hour into it, and I pressed stop, and I'm like, this is the craziest story I've ever heard. And I knew I had so much to learn. So I've turned up today completely unprepared. I'm not here to ask you a whole heap of questions about a story I already know. I'm going to learn your journey today, man.
I reckon it's the best way to do it. Ad-lib it. When I do podcasts, I find the ones that come across more authentic are the ones that ad-libbed.
Yeah.
I really do. They're the ones I like. I don't like if I'm going to get bamboozled or anything like that. That's okay, man. I've been in police interviews. I know my way around them. But I think the authentic thing has that flow. I just love it. Like two mates just having a conversation, and like we're just, in the pub, and that works. I think people pick up on that.
Well, man, I guess for you, so that you know, everything you tell me today is going to be new to me. So I didn't deliberately go and learn your story because it's, from what I have touched on, it's a crazy journey you've been on, man. Start at the start. What was life like for Kid Russell?
Well, my parents are English 10-pound ponds. They immigrated from Liverpool, England, 1965, with 3 boys and a girl. Me and my brother, Bill, we're born in Liverpool, Australia. We grew up in a housing commission area in west of Sydney, called a place called Mount Druitt. Look, it ain't the end of the earth, but you can see it from there. But, it was just a real blue-collar working-class area. People were factory workers, tradesmen at best. I think that's what you're aspiring to be if you're lucky enough to get a trade, because trades weren't like they are now. They weren't abundant, like for apprenticeships and that sort of stuff like that. You really had to be something special to become a tradesman. And my heroes back then, from an early age, I recall, were criminals, bank robbers and drug dealers, and that drug problem was only pot and that sort of thing back in them days. The heroin epidemic and the ice epidemic had definitely not hit. And people had flash cars and the best clothes and all that. Oh, man, that stuff looked exciting to me. And
you said that you looked up to these guys. You obviously knew them. Is that through connections of your family or just because they were in the community?
Yeah, they're just neighbourhoods.
Your family?
I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and none of my family have ever displayed any antisocial behaviour. None of them. I've even had a brother who was a prison officer. My eldest brother's an electrician. My second eldest brother was like a factory manager. Third oldest brother was a panel beater. Sister's a nurse. My other brother, he was the prison officer and horticulture. So, yeah. So
these weren't mum and dad's connections that were coming around to the house that were crims. These were just people in society. There was that many
neighbours. 6 houses up, there was this housing commission house with all the Jags and 450 SL Mercedes-Benz convertibles, and everyone knew what they were up to, and you know what I mean? Later, that family actually got later pinched for a big drug importation, but and there was the bank robbers. In the day, there was the SLR 5000s and the A9X hatchbacks and the GDA Phase 3 Falcons, and only Crims had them in my area. They were the best cars to have, and I was car crazy. You know, my brother was a panel beater spray painter, used to bring cars home, fix them up, and I had dreams of building myself a street car like that up. And I used to see the factory workers up at the bus stop of a morning.
How young were you when you're talking that you...
When I started to notice that, have an awareness, I reckon about 9 or 10, where you start to really have a passion for something. And mine was cars, like 9 or 10. And then, you know, by the time of 12 years old, my dad said, if you want to drink alcohol, do it at home. I was allowed to drink, I was allowed to smoke, and there were two things I've never been big on in life. I remember when I was about 14, I was down the park drinking, and my dad said, just get home and drink. Drank a whole heap of beer, and then he put a bottle of scotch under my nose and said, had that. And the next morning, I'm spewing everywhere, and he's coming with a bottle of scotch and said, you want to go again? And from that moment, I've never been a big drinker. I was just like...
Are you a drinker these days?
Oh, occasionally I have a glass of wine or something like that, but nothing, like, not really. It's not my thing. I'm the type of person that can't do one of anything. I can't have one Tim Tam. I'll smash the packet. I won't have one roll of chocolate or smash the blocks. I just know my weaknesses. I'm really...
One's too many, 100's not enough.
Oh, man. Like, you know, I was known, mate, for going down to get a carton of milk and coming home 4 days later.
Yeah.
You know, going on those sorts of benders. And
so 9 and 10, you're seeing these guys in your street and you're taken by it. You're impressed.
Yeah, look good, mate. Blokes coming home from jail being treated like return war heroes. They were celebrated. There was a documentary, I think it was SBS or ABC run that documentary, Struggle Street. That was done in our area. That was a bit of an overreaction to the portrayal of it, of how we lived there, but it wasn't far off it. I was taught I went down to local shops, and the local kids teach you how to steal cars. They go, you just do this and you do this and you break the column and you do this. So I could walk up to a car and I just knew how to, by someone just explaining it to me. So I stole a car one night in Parramatta, and I smashed the car because I just didn't know how to drive. And I thought...
Did you do it with mates or you?
Yeah, one mate, and him and I, we got in a police chase, and I smashed the car, and then the next day he got caught and told on me. But I got away.
Good mate.
Yeah, good mate, and rock solid. Anyway, back in the days, they didn't have the diversion programs from locking kids up they do now. You got in trouble, you got locked straight up, and the point was to teach you a lesson. And she sentenced me to serve 6 months in a boys' home, and also suspended my license for 3 years, even though I didn't have one. I was 14.
Just to go back, there's a little bit for me missing, and that is like, so you've gone and stolen your first car. You've obviously come from a fairly conservative family.
Yeah.
You've said that there's no crime. When did the maniac switch flick? Like, you've obviously looked up to these people. But when did you go, you know what, I'm going to go and steal a car?
What had happened was, you'd be at school, and someone would pull into the bus bay at school in a car that they've stolen out of the teacher's car park. One of the boys that had come home from the boys' homes. So they go, yeah, jump in, young Russell. We'll give you a lift. Drop you off at home. The next day, the teacher comes up and says, oh, you were seen jumping in my car at the bus stop. Who was driving you? And I knew from a young age you didn't tell on people. So I don't know, some woman and her son. I don't even know them. They just give me a lift, and I just didn't. And they knew they were never going to get anything out of me. But another thing was this. I'd be at the shops, and the local bank robber would get out of jail. 6 weeks later, he's pulling up in his brand new car. He opens his glove box, and back then they were the $1 and $2 notes. He'd say, young Russell, come over here. And he'd call you over and he'd go, yeah, mate. And he'd give you like $250. It's like $2,500 now. He'd go, mate, go and buy your family something nice. And if I took that money out of my family, they'd say, we don't want it. Don't bring it here. I grew up really, really quick, right? My mum worked in a plastics factory, so I never used to see her. So I was cooking at 5 years old. I was self-sufficient at a real young age. My dad, he was a beautiful guy. He was a merchant seaman. So he'd spent a lot of time out at sea. And when he moved to Australia, he was just disassociated. He grabbed a book. There was none of this. And he was pretty sick from emphysema from a young age. He died when I was 17. But he'd just grab his books. He wasn't engaged in, let's have a talk about the world and let's, you know, and that's what I've tried to be different with my own kids. But he was never engaging, wasn't interested in my day. I loved him to death. That's just who he was. I accepted that's who he was. My mother was the most loving, caring person in the world. And I used to look forward to weekends because I used to get to see her and we'd cook at family dinner, and that was the most exciting part. I played sport. My family were English, and they just thought there's only one game you play, and that's soccer. And soccer weren't for me. I made rep teams and everything like that. I just had a natural flair for soccer, but it was just something I've never had any passion for. I like rugby league. I like boxing. So that discipline that sport gives a lot of people wasn't really an option for me. I seen a lot of the guys in my area that were engaged in sport, and like a lot of the people from my area, like that area now produces really, really good sportsmen because all the sporting authorities have realised good talent comes from there.
So with that lack of discipline from a tight-knit group like a club and having mentors and with your old man away all the time, was there potentially a lack of discipline in your childhood?
Oh, 100%. And I look back on it with the benefit of hindsight. And, you know, I like to go deep. I like to know. I like to lift the bonnet now and find out what the problem was with the car. And I like to dig. And that was definitely one of them. Like, I look back, statistically, kids that do swimming and little athletics have got like 70% chance of never getting in trouble. Like, if you engage your kid in swimming and little athletics, you really reduce the risk of them ever getting into trouble, you know, the discipline. And obviously, when your kids are enrolled in that, you've got to be involved in it. Your parents, you know what I mean? So, and I think it's a lot, for me, it was a lot to do with validation, you know what I mean? I got validated in the street with my mates, and they were the wrong mates. You know, I looked up to the wrong people. I got validation of them. It was them people that were making me feel important by giving me money and, you know what I mean, and teaching me the rules in life. You don't tell on people. You don't mess around with other blokes, girls. You don't talk to the police are the enemy. And that was where I got my validation. That's where I got my sense of belonging.
And was this a generational thing? Like, was this a thing of the era, or was this a socio-economic thing and it was a thing of your suburb?
Yeah, definitely. Look, a combination of both. It was definitely a socio-economic thing, and it was definitely the culture of the suburb.
Yeah.
Because that area, you go to prison, and there's a lot of criminals. Like, we were a force in prison to the point we basically called the shots at one, because you fought one of ours, you fought the lot of us. The amount of drill blokes, I was always looked after my first prison sentence where none of them could help me. But after that was really sort of, that was my tribe.
So you've got to early teens, and you flick the maniac switch, and it's game on for Russell.
It is, and there was no looking back. Unfortunately, I went to the notorious Daruk Boys Home, which is west southern Sydney, which is the subject of a 60-minute story, was prolific sexual and physical abuse. And unfortunately, I didn't escape that. Now, some people will say to you, that would have been enough to turn you off crime. It doesn't work like that. Predators and pedophiles don't deter kids from doing crime. You know what I mean? You don't use them. If anything, it created a resentment for me and an anti-authoritarian attitude, you know what I mean? I hated them even more.
And this was at 15?
15, man. That place. The sad part about Daruk was that was a pedophile ring definitely operating out of there, because overnight time when the abuse was taking place, there was people coming into that place that didn't work there.
Mate, do you know what I turned your podcast off? You mentioned on there that not that you could prove it, but you genuinely believed in your heart that it was a sanctioned pedophile ring set up to punish criminals and deter juvenile crime.
100%.
Like, that's some really heavy shit, hey? To be 15 and put in a room with known pedophiles, it flies in the face of everything that we're supposed to be about.
Look, I think things have changed the attitude. Like, pedophiles' greatest weapons are victim silence and shame, right? That's their greatest weapon. If people don't talk about it, they'll get away with it. My main aim is to get people talking about this. But back then, people didn't talk about it. It was a real shameful thing. And, you know, it's funny. Obviously, the people that were coming in were obviously pedophiles to do a lot of the abusing. But, you know, I think some of them were just real sadists that really enjoyed hurting children. Like, that was, the abuse took part away in a real sadistic way. It wasn't like someone who was really enjoying sexual gratification. It was a real sadistic way.
Tell me what happened the first day you went in there and they shut the door.
They were dormitories, and they made us wear socks, right? And they were highly polished wooden floors. And if you took your socks, and that was meant for this, so you could slip over really easy. So you couldn't run or anything like that. So they made you wear these socks, and it was really, so you were just sliding everywhere you went. But the first night, you were in these dormitories, and there was all these sections, and everyone could see everyone. There's like 50 kids in a room. And there's one, like a box, an office box there with 2 or 3 officers in it. So that first night, I'm laying in bed, and then I'd seen things like, because obviously I was scared, right? I was a kid, I was a 15-year-old kid. I'd seen things, I'd seen them grabbing kids out of beds and taking them into the toilets and that sort of stuff. And then you could see, like, there was a back door open, it went out to outside of that office, and you'd see people coming in, and then it'd go from 3 officers to being into to about 7. And then all these men were sort of grabbing a kid and then taking them into the shower. There was a lot of abuse, and then I got the call up, and then someone, next minute, I'm laying in bed, and I could feel this bloke who had the worst breath, and I smell sewer sometimes, and it just reminds me of his breath. And he's got his hand under my blanket, and he's playing with my genitals, right? And he said, get up. And he said, get up. And he started heavy breathing. And made me want to vomit. No, it's called an ablutions block. So that's the only part that not everyone can see. And he took me in there. And when I went in there, it was him and another officer that I did know. And they both sexually abused me. And that was just a game changer. It was like life-changing for me. And from that point on in my life, it created a really serious void, a really serious hole. It's like the void in itself is really hard to explain, but it's like a whirlpool of all these different emotions like shame, anger, guilt, embarrassment, resentment. It's like it just swells in your stomach.
The decision that they put you into a room with pedophiles changed your life forever. But it wasn't even that. It was the actual guards themselves that were the perpetrators as well. Like, this is on multiple levels.
And the crazy part about it used to be these old women that worked in, they were called matrons. They'd come in maybe 3 days a week and they'd hand out the clothes and make sure you had sheets for your beds and everything like that. And like I tried talking to one. She looked like a motherly type or an old granny. I said, can I talk to you about something? She goes, what's that? And I told her and she goes, oh, don't tell lies about Mr. Murphy. He's a good man. He'd never do that. One boy just said to me, don't even try reporting it. And he said, they're not going to listen to you.
So this is ingrained through the whole.
Oh, man, that place was full of it. And I think the 60 Minutes story is worth looking at because it shows you how systemic it was and how entrenched and how well-versed. Like, I escaped from there. I ran away from there. And my family lived about 10 k's from them. I got home in about an hour and a half. By the time I got home, they'd been to my parents' house and they said, look, and when I knocked on the door, my mum said, look, they've been here. And they said, if you just hand yourself in, they're not going to ring the police. They're not going to get the police involved. And my dad was really crook with emphysema. And so what I did, he was out the backyard when I got there and he was mowing the lawn. I said, listen, I'll mow the lawn for you and then you can drop me back off out there. And they said, that's a good thing to do. There was a part of me that wanted to tell him, but I'd just seen how sick my dad was. There's the embarrassment factor because, look, a couple of things I know today that are different. I used to think that was gay, right? I know that pedophiles ain't gay. Pedophiles are pedophiles and gay people are gay people. And it was just one of those things to talk about that sexuality stuff with your parents. That was just I wanted to, but I was like getting to the line to do it. And it was like, and I just didn't want to hurt my dad. I didn't want to hurt my mum. And I said, yeah, right, sweet. So let's go. And then they drove me back out there and they put me in this thing. It's called the boob. And it's a segregation cell. It's got a little can in it for the toilet. And in that area, midwinter, it gets like minus 3 or 4 degrees, you know. So they put me in there, stripped me naked, and I just couldn't sleep. I was shivering. I was jogging on the spot, trying to get my body temperature up. I really thought something bad was going to, like I thought I was going to, because of that cold. So I jogged on the spot for hours, and then they came in and that sexual abuse took place again. Anyway, long story short, it was an ongoing process. I was watching it happen, and I was just getting angrier and angrier and angrier, and the void was just getting bigger and bigger, more and more of it. And then one day you just wake up and you're fully desensitized to it. You normalized it.
How long was this sentence for?
I was only 6 months, but I sort of knocked that over. Then I got released, but then I got released and I was a different kid. Like, I was never, because I was allowed to smoke cigarettes and stuff like that. I was allowed to drink. Drugs and alcohol and all that didn't really appeal to me, especially pot, right? Because the whole smoking I used to hate the smell of it and any cigarette smoke or anything like that. And I just associated pot with the same stuff. And it never appealed to me. But one day I was in this underpass thing, and this bloke, all he had to do, he said to me, he was down there with a bong smoking cones, and he said to me, have one of these, it'll make you feel better. And that's the only word I needed to hear. The only thing I ever needed to hear was that will make me feel better. And then, so I had cone and I had 3 and then I had 4 and then I was just numb, and that's where I wanted to be. And I went, that did make me feel better, and I'm going to do this every day. But what was making me feel better from was that void I had. And I was filling that void with stuff, and I was escaping that. It was a form of escapism. But from that time of that abuse, I also was escaping something.
So it was a 6 months prison sentence. It was really a life sentence.
I come home from that joint with a whole heap of different knowledge about different crime, and I wasn't deterred. I wasn't going to let them win, because that sexual abuse to me is, they did that to break me. I'm going to prove to them they didn't break me. They did that to beat me, and I'm going to prove them they'd done nothing. It affected me nothing, and I was so disassociated, so disenfranchised that I was hell-bent on not letting them win.
So in essence, they'd actually created a monster.
I think so.
They created a worse person that went in there.
100%. And there's so much evidence about other boys' homes like Tamworth, where the sexual abuse was minimal, but brutalisation was full on. And you had Ivan Milat, Billy Monday, Archie McAfee, all these blokes that went on to commit serious murders and crimes and rapes and all that sort of thing when they showed no propensity for violence prior to that. They were pinched on misdemeanor offences, but that's been proven in a documentary called Home for Killers or House for Killers or something like ABC documentary. So, and I was the same. I come out and I said, and I was telling them, boys, I know how to steal Porsches, I know how to break, and mate, you start talking like that in Mount Druitt, you got a cheer squad. Let's see you do it. And so I'd go over to the affluent areas, and you could go to Kmart and buy what's called a dent puller. It was cost $6. It was a panel beating tool. So it's got a screw on the end of it, and it's got like a weight, and you screw it into a dent on the car, you drill a hole and screw it in, and bang, bang, it knocks the dent out of the car. You screw that into the ignition barrel of the car, it knocks the ignition barrel out of the car, and you stick a screwdriver and start it. That's how quick or easy a Porsche is to steal. And I could steal a Porsche in 27 seconds was my record from start to finish. So this day, my first Porsche was stolen, 1982 930 twin turbo Porsche. They were about 700 or 800 grand. They were a classic. I was taking coppers on, chasing them, and it creates like an urban myth. It creates a hero, and all these people.
Most celebrity started.
You got your cheer squad. You're going up and down the main straight at Mount Druitt called Luxford Road, and people are out cheering you. They've heard about it. I was never stopping. I was escalating, and I said, "You thought I was bad before. Wait until you see me now." One day, so we got a police chase. We stole it. Once again, favourite car was the 930 twin turbo Porsche. Stole this car from Whale Beach. And I'd been up this road before. It's called French's Forest Road. It's one of the darkest roads you'll ever see. I'm saying to my mate, this doesn't seem right because it was so light. And my mate opened the sunroof and there's a helicopter over the top. It was a police helicopter. And it was the first time they'd ever used a police helicopter in a police chase because of the kids all stealing Porsches and it. And over at Mossman is like this bridge. It's a spit bridge and it opens up to let boats in. And I said, we've got to get across that bridge. And so panic started hitting them. We just got across as it was starting to come up. It was like something out of Blues Brothers. We ended up driving down this dead-end street and jumping into Sydney Harbour and trying to swim it away, and we got caught by the water police. Subsequently, we went to a Juror Children's Court the next day, and we fronted a judge called Blackmore. So he said to me, I'm going to sentence you to 12 months in prison. And he said, I stipulate it goes to an adult prison. So anyway, long story short, I just still didn't believe it. I said to my mate, we're not going to jail, man. What's going on? He said 12 months in prison, adult prison. So I still didn't believe it. We got loaded up in a paddy wagon and they drove out to Long Bay and I said, this is real, man. This is real. And we got there and I don't know, those officers really picked up on our fear. And they really tried to capitalise on a strip search and us making us pull our arse cheeks apart, which they're not allowed to do. And giving us clothes that were 10 sizes too big for us. And then, like, you know, walking, trying to hold your tracksuit pants up. It's like a bed pack. So it's got your sheets, cup and jug. And back then, they used to give you pillows. So we've got this bed pack and trying to hold my pants. And we got this cell. There's two blokes. One's on the bottom bunk and one bloke's on the top bunk. And then the mattress went down. As they're slamming the cell door, one of the officers went back with a bit of laugh. He said, have a bit of fun with him, boys. Or words to that effect, and the door shut, and then they wanted to know, and because my case had been on the news, my police chase had been on the news. Oh, is that you? Yeah, sweet. And then they said, oh, well, you're going to learn. Firstly, they said, oh, the boys are going to love you. And I'm thinking, what are they going to love me for? And that night, I was sexually abused by both of them. And then, I don't know, it's just like a numbness, man.
Was this a prolific thing happening?
Yeah, it was. Well, that wing was one wing at the CIP, Central Industrial Prison, at Long Bay. Now, that wing at that time, you had to be a sex offender. There was two necrophiliacs there or corrupt cops. Them people had to be in that wing for their own protection. Otherwise, if they would have been in the mainstream prison, because of the nature of their crimes, they would have got murdered. They would have got killed. Now, these people put me in there because they think that's a safer place for me to be in there with pedophiles than bank robbers and whatever.
As a blonde-haired, blue-eyed 17-year-old boy, they thought it was safe to put you in with pedophiles.
They just thought that was like feeding a chop to a lion. It was crazy. Then the worst bit of it for me was this bloke. He had like a little hunchback. Had these real dark Coca-Cola. He just was a sickening-looking thing. His name was Jeff Hardy, a prolific necrophiliac. And he just actually pushed me into the cell and then sexually abused me. But then at the end of it, he pulled out this old syringe that had like a piece of thong as a plunger, like the rubber bit that goes on it, and then a nail that was in the thong, sort of handmade syringe, and that didn't look good. He said, you're going to have this. And it was the first time I ever had heroin, and he injected me with heroin. And then I started vomiting into the toilet, and that's when the sexual abuse started happening again. While I was vomiting, I was on my knees on the toilet, and sexual abuse started happening again. The prison officers thought it was funny. How you getting on here, young fella? The boys looking after you, and comments like that, you know what I mean? And I did try to report it, especially with Jeff, the necrophiliac guy, and he told him, and that bloke said, I'll kill you. You ever do that to me? He said, that's a good way for you to die in jail doing that sort of stuff.
How far up the hierarchy do you... Like, this is the guards that are seeing this, witnessing it.
Well, that guy, the one I tried to report it was deputy governor.
How high up the hierarchy do you reckon?
All of them,
the knowledge of what goes on.
All of them knew that. But you know the crazy part about that? If I would have been put into a mainstream prison, that wouldn't have happened to me. There's not a hope in that. That would have never happened to me because there would have been 50 blokes from Mount Druitt, and that would have happened to me. Them blokes from Mount Druitt will die for the young, like the mentoring, like the older blokes, and then like bank robbers that had given me money and that were there. They would have died for me. They would have protected me with their life. I would have been way safer. So in their...
Did they know that?
Hey? Of course they would have known that. They know. Them prison officers would have said, oh, like when you tell them your address, oh, you're from Mount Druitt, there's heaps of blokes from Mount Druitt. There's mostly some blokes in that jail in a cell on their own. Would have been less crowded. For one, it would have been 110% safer. 110% safer. And I was proven later because I went back. Like what happened was I got out after 12 months. I didn't spend all the time.
How long were you in segregation for?
I was in that protection unit for 4 months, and then I got what's called a Section 94A transfer to the boys' home. And like when I got to the boys' home, it was like I was some sort of, once again, a war hero type sort of thing. I'd just been to jail, so I was sort of treated a lot of privileges and that. And then I get out after the 12 months. No, I'd done 8 months. I think I'd end up doing 8 months of the 12 months. And then by this stage, my mum had moved to Liverpool, and right next to Liverpool was a suburb called Cabramatta, and Cabramatta had a really bad heroin epidemic at that time. So it was easy. You jump off the train, you could score heroin. And I had a taste for heroin. I got a taste for it, and I loved how that made me feel. It just made all my troubles just fade away and made me feel like Superman. I just felt good. And that became my daily routine, go commit crime. In that case, I was breaking into department stores like David Jones, Myer. Back then it was a thing called Grace Brothers. And I was breaking into them and getting heaps of video recorders and Seiko watches, and it was always cashed up. I ended up getting pinched for 5 break-and enters, and I went to prison, but this time in a mainstream prison. And there was a really good guy there, and he got a real bad kick in the meat. His name was Gary Stokes, called Casper, and he ended up bashing a finder folder, and he ended up getting 25 years for it. And he made it known. He was from Mount Druitt, he said, and he told blokes, he won't even look at them kids the wrong way, about just a bunch of us. And he said, I'll kill yous. And he said, no one's ever going to hurt them kids. And he was really like a father figure to us all, you know what I mean? But he was a really good guy. And he was
an inmate or a guard?
No, a mate. He was a bloke from Mount Druitt.
No, but I mean, he was in prison?
Yeah.
Time?
Yeah. He later ended up punching a bloke. He hit a bloke once, and he turned him into a vegetable because he was 130 kilos, 6'7", 130 kilos, and he was a rock and roller. He could fight. And some bloke got smart with a finder folder, and he got the worst rap because it was just not him. It wasn't who he was. He was just a beautiful man and really dedicated to changing the lives of our young people. So, yeah, and that's what it was. And jail's a funny place, you know. Jail's one of these places water finds its own level. The bank robbers hang with the bank robber. The drug importers are over here. The people who steal cars are over here. It's a really funny, and, you know, it could be 5 bank robbers from Mount Druitt. They just hang out together all day and train. And that's where I gravitated to. Statistically, 60% of prisoners have been on the receiving end of some sort of trauma, whether it's intergenerational, sexual or physical or psychological abuse. That's been a big part or an underlying issue in their offending behaviour. Trauma, and I say this, treat the trauma, treat the drug addiction, treat the propensity for violence. We treat the trauma, we'll get rid of the wife basher. We'll get rid of the drug addict. We'll get rid of the criminal and the antisocial person. It's a long way to doing it, you know what I mean? So unfortunately with the prison system, the officers in there, there's a real big thing of indoctrination. You get an officer that comes in, he's got all the good intentions in the world. I want to save the day, I want to help, I want to be part of people's rehabilitation. They will hound that bloke or woman or whatever until she changes and toes the company line. My mum came to visit me in a jail in Brisbane once, and my mum said, son, I love you. You know I'll visit you anywhere. She goes, but I'll never come back to this jail again, what they've just done to me. And I pulled out officer, I said, you ever treat my mother like that? I don't give a who you are, I'll break your jaw. And you ever treat my mother like that, she's not a criminal. He goes, I'm just doing my job. No, your job is not to harass old people. So they do this purposely to deter people from supporting you. That's one of the... I just want to reiterate something. There's some really good officers in there. I'm friends with a few of them today on Facebook. The ones that have been really good to me, I'll call them friends. And people go, you can't do that, they're prisoners. I can, because I'm me and I'll be who I want. I'm not going to be indoctrinated in everyone else's way of thinking.
So you're in prison, you're starting to hang out with the bank robbers. How long did you get? So you're doing David Jones.
Yeah. I got a big sentence for that one. I got 11 years for a non-parole period of 4 years, and I was 18 at the time for breaking in. It's like, you don't hear of them since. But in saying that, them sentences weren't harsh because they had remissions at the time. So you'd do just around about 60% of that sentence. So the 4-year bottom, I think I'm not for a period of 4 years. I've done 2 years, 4 months or something like that. And I went down to the notorious Goulburn prison. I was just kicking off down there, like all the violence and that. An old guy down there called Ray Johnson, his words echoed in my head for many years to come. And he was this guy that was a farmer, real hard-working farmer, and the banks foreclosed on him and took his farm off him, so he became a bank robber. And that bloke was just a soul of the earth bloke. Ended up getting on drugs and everything in jail. Like, he just lost his life. Anyway, I said to Ray, Ray, how do I rob these banks? And he goes, well, son, get a job in the council. And I said, and what, stake him out, use the council card to stake him out? And he goes, hey, just don't do them, mate. He said, because it's a lonely old life of a bank robber. And he just jumped up. It was like a scene out of Heat or something like that. You know what I mean? A scene out of The Town or Heat or one of those good armed robbery movies. And he just walked away. I was like, it was a real Robert De Niro moment for Ray Johnson. You know what I mean? And then those words echoed in my head for so many years. Like, I'd be sitting in my cell when I'm doing my 15-year jail sentence, and it just echoed in my head. And he ended up committing suicide, that guy. It just echoed in my head. And I got out from...
So you did 2.5 years? Yeah,
about 2.5 years. I got out from Goulburn prison, and part of your parole conditions, you don't associate with known criminals. But you got to go to a parole officer, and there's a room, the parole officer, there's a room full of them. Everyone's in the waiting room. You say, not allowed to associate them unless you're at the parole office. And anyway, so there was my mate there, that bloke I knew from jail. And straight away he said, we're going to hit a bank. I said, you bet we are.
So you just got out?
I wasn't that far out. But my family rallied around me. My brother's an electrician, and he gave me a start. Like, he said, look, I'll come and work for me, and then I'll give you an apprenticeship. He said, but just prove yourself for a bit. And anyway, it was a Monday, and my brother said, we're not working today. My mate had a flexi day. It was the perfect storm.
Yeah.
And I went to his joint, and he looked at me and go, we going? I said, fuck, I know if we are. I said, but this is what I want. I said, I just want you to drive, because I'm going to rob a bank. I'm going to do the first one on my own, because all the bank robbers said, you really know what you're doing when you're doing them on your own, when you're going in on your own. So we invested. I paid $4.90 for a knife, and better return than crypto, let me tell you. So I rocked into the bank with this knife, and you know what? And all the good ones, the decent ones will tell you, don't make people panic, don't traumatize people, just get in, don't yelling and screaming like you see in the movies and letting shots go off and on. And this one bloke said, just keep calm. He said, talking a real calm tone. He said, you don't want people, the worst thing you want is people panicking. And I said, listen, I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here to get this money. I'm going to be here for as little time as possible. And I'm going to get in and get out. I'm not going to hurt any of you. But, no one's got to be stupid. Remember, it's not your money. So I went over.
With a knife?
Yeah, we're just with a knife, a big Bowie knife thing. But I made a silly mistake on that first bank I did, and I never made that same mistake ever again. I let them pull all the money on the counter themselves. Never do that, because what they do, they're trained. So they put all the $5 notes down and all the hundreds, so it looks like it's fucking 200 grand. It was actually 17 grand. You go over, get them to stand away, and there's like a bottom cupboard where all the big notes are. $10,000 slabs, 100, $5,000 slabs of 50s, and $200 slabs, 20s, and the rest. And this time I didn't, and anyway, I robbed that. I just walked out real casually, laid on the back seat of the car. My mate just drove off like driving Miss Daisy, and off we went. And I'm shoe mad. I got more shoes than Imelda Marcus. Wait until you see what I got in there.
I noticed on the way in.
Yeah. So I'm shoe mad. I wanted to go and get, so I drove to Liverpool in Sydney to buy some shoes, and we're all pulling up. All these cop cars are turning up, and it was crazy. And I'm saying to my mate, and Roger Rogers, like, we had a real road cop down here at the time called Roger Rogers, and he was killing bank robbers. And I think he was suspended at the time, but his team was still around, and they were putting the wind up a lot of blokes, killing them, robbing them. And so they're all running towards us. I said to my mate, just put your hand on the dash, mate, because we'll get shot here. We just thought they'd followed us, and we were gone. First bank and gone. Anyway, they start running past us. Turns out the bank where we just parked out the front of it just been robbed. So people...
By someone else.
By someone else, yeah. So off we went and bought our shoes. I got in a bit of a groove with that. And a few of the other boys just got out of jail, like, within days. And one of them said, I've got a shotgun. Let's rob a bank.
The fact you've just done one and another one, what was it? Was bank robbing the thing to do?
Oh, mate, it was massive. Yeah. They were going off left, right and centre. They were going off everywhere. And you go to jail and there wouldn't be a bank robber in jail these days, but you go to jail, like say for instance, 400 men in jail, 45, 50 blokes would be bank robbers.
Yeah, right.
It was so prolific. You could rob a bank back in them days and get 100 grand. A house, you could buy a house in the western suburbs of Sydney for 30.
I was going to say, because you said before you would have done it differently. You only got 17 grand, but 17 grand would have been a lot of money back then.
Yeah, it was. The next bank I got 110,000, so I got the equivalent of 4 houses. But there was 3 of us involved in that.
So things continued to escalate.
Oh, man, they kicked off, and they were never going to stop until I got caught. No way. So the next one I robbed the Commonwealth Bank. That's when it escalated to professional. Shotguns. We'd done it 100 metres away from a police station. We drove a stolen car up the driveway of the cop shop, let all the tyres down, put a club lock on it so they couldn't come to us. And then we just fucking hit it, went and rocked it and done that. And the next one I done was National Australia Bank at Turramurra, where I started taking guns off security guards. And that was fun.
So 110 grand you got out of that?
Yeah, 110,000.
You would have been living like a rock star.
I was rocking it. I had a beautiful unit on the water. The S5V 5000 had come out. I bought one of them cash. A beautiful bike.
Pretty brazen to do it 100 metres up the road from the cop shop.
That was the challenge, right? God loves a try, so they say. But, you know, I love that. Anything that challenged me. I remember one day, my favourite gun's a .357 Magnum. And I seen this security guard at a bank one day, and I said to my mate, pull over, I want it. He goes, what do you mean you want it? I said, I want a gun. This bloke bolted up the road.
Did you have a balaclava on or anything?
Yeah, no, I didn't have it at that stage. I said, come here. I pulled a gun on him. I said, come here. And he took off up the road. I've got a single shot 22. He's got a .357 Mag. He could have blown my head off. And he bolted. And I said, I just want your gun.
Was there any fear of that ever happening with these security guards?
Yeah, in some ways. Look, I think I had a death wish. You know, I was in that much pain. I didn't care if I lived or died. That was the whole thing. That was that crazy. What I have now, through a lot of hard work, is, you know, self-belief, self-love, and purpose, right? Back then, when you haven't got none of that, you don't care if you live or die. When you feel worthless, because that's what I was chasing. All of that behaviour was escapism behaviour. It was escape type of behaviour. I was escaping. I was doing something that pushed my buttons. I was doing something that made me feel different, that made me live on the edge.
Took away a bit of the pain.
Because anything that made me not feel that shame and embarrassment and all that pain and hurt that I felt, man, I would have cut my toes off if that would have made me feel better.
Yeah.
So, and that's what it was. And then,
mate, it's a serious burden to be carrying around in life, isn't it?
That was horrible. It's horrible. You know what? And I look back on it now, as I say, with the benefit of hindsight, there's a bit of admiration for myself for how I did handle that. Because I didn't lash out and go, like, people, look, I'll tell you something now, some of the worst serial killers, or not serial killers, some of the worst murderers we've ever in this country were victims of child sexual abuse or intergenerational trauma and stuff like that. I didn't have that thing. I didn't want to hurt anyone. You know, I used to rob banks with unloaded guns. I had no intentions of killing anyone. I would have preferred to got shot. No worries. It would have put me in my pain. The realisation of how much power I was handing to people by my actions and the drug use, and that realisation is I wasn't hurting anyone but myself. And I was giving people power. I didn't want people to be in a position where they could perpetrate bad stuff on me. And I wanted to get them people out of my life. And I did, you know. I got out of jail. I got a job as a fitness instructor at a Japanese jockey school up the North Coast, because fitness has always been a big part of my mental health stuff. And I met the mother of my kids. She was the accountant there, and we had 2 kids. We bought a house at Currumbin. We had a really good marketing and advertising business, and everything was honky-dory. Everything was still... But there were still the nightmares, and there was still the underlying issue of the abuse itself that had never been treated. And it was...
internal demons.
Yeah. And it was never going to go away until I treated it. So I started drinking. Like, I was 12 years clean and sober, and I started drinking. And then snorting coke, and then a hangover, and then fucking on the heroin and everything like that. So, long story short, ended up back in jail, and it took me 10 years. That was in 2004. 2004, it took me 10 years. 10 years exactly to sort of be able to turn it back around, and got back on the drugs, back into jail, doing stick-ups and that again. Got pinched on a heap of stick-ups. I got caught coming out of a bank in Coolangatta. And the bloke jumped all over me, and he bashed me, and they said to me, you know, an old mate said to me, I just saved your life. And there's a real, I don't know, like, I talk about this universal stuff looking after me, and he did. I said, if you just stay not liking you, stop punching in the back of the head. And he went, yeah, all right. And he pulled him up because a few of them were kicking me and shit like that. Look, I went to jail, and I had every intentions of killing myself. I had a plan, man.
Well, these cops that got you out the front?
No, just stiff, super citizens, I call them, you know.
Yeah.
Good old boys. Yeah, they just doing the public service, whatever it is. And then I went to the prison, and I'd been to that prison before, and there was a bloke there who I suspected of being a sex offender, and he was denied it, but it was later confirmed he was. Comes up to me, and there's like a display window on the door so that screws can look on and check on if you're alive or whatever. And he goes, I know you and I have never seen eye to eye before. And he said, but I'm offering you this. You know, as a peace offering. It was a shot of heroin. And I said, I looked at him and I banged the window. I said, you know what? No matter how bad I felt, I could never take anything off you because I know you're a grub. I said, I know what you're in for. I know you deny it, but I know what you're in for. And I said, so you better get out my way because I'm actually hurt you. So he took off. And anyway, when I got into the unit, there was a young bloke there. He's got all his psych books out. He's studying. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm studying to be a psychologist. He said, I took your recommendations a while ago. And he looked me up and down with disdain and said, maybe you should take some of your own. And then just went back to studying. Then my mate turned up. My mate's a lawyer, and I'd flown a flag for his business and I helped him build his firm up. And then he said, mate, I made a few favours. I think I can get you a good result. And I said, what do you reckon? And he said, maybe have to do 4 years. I said, do that with bells on. Do it really easy. Because I was thinking when I got pinched, I'm going to do 10 or 15 years, and it's going to be over. The thought of that made me suicidal. So, and on the way back, I was walking past the education block and the door was open. It's never open. Them doors are never open. It was locked tight and screws on there. So it was just open. It was like it was meant to be. And I walked in there and I said, hey, how are you? And they all knew me. I said, you're back, Russell? I said, yeah. And they said, what do you want to do? I said, man, I want to study law. They said, well, you have to do a thing called tertiary prep, and it's TPP, tertiary preparation program. And they pick what you want to study and they gear that up. It's like a HSC, but they've geared it in for you, and it's a fast track. I said, yeah, sign me up for that. So that night, get home, back in my home. I just hate calling prison cells home. But I'd get back to my cell. One of my favourite shows is 7:30 Report. I love current affairs shows, and flick it on, and here it is, 7:30 Report. They're going after George Pell. And I thought, that's the Royal Commission Institution Response to Child Sexual Abuse. And I say this, and I say Julia Gillard was the best Prime Minister we've ever had, because every Prime Minister, the decent ones, leave a legacy, and hers was that. Anyway, they were going after George Pell, and I thought to myself, and something was telling me the time's right, man, start talking about this stuff. So I went down, I jumped on the phone, and I said to one of my friends, can you just get me the address of this? And I just wrote a foolscap page of paper. This is what happened to me. This is the years, this is where the places took part. And I'd heard of stories of people doing this before about grieving or making amends to people or whatever and then burning it. And I looked at it as that. I was okay, I'll make amends. I'll make peace with this. I'll send this letter. That'll be it for me. That's all I'll ever need. And that's how I'll be able to get on with my life. And I wrote it and I sent it. And 2 weeks later, I'd forgotten all about it. I get called for this legal visit. And it's these people. And her name was Michelle Burford. I'll never forget it. And she said to me, I'm from the Royal Commission. We got your letter and we just want you to know we believe you. That's all I needed anyone ever say about that stuff. We believe you. And I went, wow. And I had tears in my eyes. And then she took me through this whole process. She goes, we know this happened because other people have told us that it happened to you. And yeah, sweet. And then bang, straight out. And they said, now we've got some counselling lined up for you. And I said, what do you mean some counselling lined up for me? And then they said, no, we've got this woman waiting for you. So straight into trauma counselling. And then bang, wow.
Did you become public enemy number one in the prison because you're sort of talking out about what happened in the...
No, but what happened was this. In prisons, you got 2 phones in a yard, right? And there's everyone knows what everyone's talking about. And I'd be ringing the Royal Commission just to check in and do something. And everyone knows. And then I'm talking on the phone, I've seen a couple of young fellas, and that can be dangerous, right? So they're talking about a bloke, oh, he's doing this. And there's little signs that you tap someone on. If you see someone coming, you tap the shoulder, that means the copper's on the way. So he was saying that through sign language, I could understand they believed that I was talking to the coppers. So I called a yard meeting, 60 blokes. And I said, I'm here to tell you, and I pointed at these kids saying, I ain't talking to no cops, I ain't no dog. I said, I'm talking to the Royal Commission about what had happened to me as a child and the abuse that I suffered. I said, I'm not telling on, no one's going to jail about what I'm doing. I said, but I'm just starting my healing journey. And I said, if anyone's got a problem, and I pointed to these 2 young ones, in particular you, let's turn it right on here right now. And then a couple of the big, because I was right up in the hierarchy in the prison, so them kids weren't just going to get me, they were going to get my mates as well. And they didn't like, and they went, oh, Russ, it wasn't like that. And I said, no, it never was. And then I told the rest of my story and everyone just clapped and I said, good on you, mate. And then 2 weeks, 40 people come and told me what had happened to them and they wanted to know how the journey began. And that's when the Voice of a Survivor was born.
Yep.
And I had my private session with the Royal Commission and they recognised that. They said, mate, we know you're a strong advocate to help survivors. And it wasn't over then, because then I got transferred back to New South Wales. And then 2 weeks to go, at the end of that 4-year sentence, and I got the coppers turn up with 6 old robberies for me. 2 weeks to go, so I had 4 years to get out, and I'd done everything I could. I wrote to... When I was in jail in Queensland, I was writing to the New South Wales Attorney General. I said, if there's any outstanding warrants or anything like that, please bring them on, because they had a habit of doing this. So I'd done everything right to sort of bring them on, and they didn't do it. And then 2 weeks ago, they charged me with... I was getting paroled to a rehab. My drug problem was under control, but I had a living problem. I was just being so real. I was being so real. I realised everything I had to do, I had to learn how to live. I had to learn to get some life skills, and a rehab would have provided that for me. So I had a rehab that specialised in reintegrating prisoners that had done a long term in prison back in the community. And I couldn't go, once they charged me with that, because I had outstanding court, I couldn't go to that. Anyway, I knew I had a compensation claim coming, and I just knew things were going to change. And by this stage, Mary was in my life, who ended up being my partner for 4 or 5 years, and she was a barrister. And she said, just have a bit of faith. You're going to get out on this. I said, she goes, first you're going to get bail. And I said, I can't get bail on jaywalking, let alone fucking 6 robberies. But anyway, Peter O'Brien come in and he said, I'll get you on bail. I said, what do you reckon I'll get me? He said, I'll get you bail. He said, I'll get you bail. He said, this is wrong what they've done to you, and the judge is going to see that. So I went to Central Local Court. This judge looked at the prosecutor and goes, this bloke's been in jail for 4 years. We've got some documentation to say that he's tried to bring these charges on and you deny they even happened. And there's a thing in law called delay. It's not illegal, but it's really looked down upon by the judges. He said to me, I want to warn you, agree with me that this is a case of delay. And she said, yes, Your Honour, I'll agree it's a case of delay. He goes, all right. And then he said, I'm going to tell you now, he's getting bail. He said, we just got to work out how we're going to go about it. And she goes, yes. Oh, and she goes, well, can I suggest a few things? He goes, I'd advise you to suggest nothing. He said, right now. And he said, and Peter O'Brien said, look, he's willing to put up surety. He's got to rehab this. And he goes, music to my ears. And he said, mate, that's what he's going, 20,000 surety and a bail or rehab. So anyway, long story short, I ended up in a rehab, North Coast in New South Wales. And I finished that program. It was really funny because they offered me, the owner of the rehab said, we'll give you the job as the general manager. We'll throw in a Corolla. And they said, we'll give you 70,000 a year in a Corolla. And I said, give me 70,000 in a Bentley. And I said, I'll take the job. Look, I just had a goal. I had a mission. The mission was to start the Voice of a Survivor. And they could have given me the job as a Prime Minister and I wouldn't have done it. It wasn't that. It wasn't even the money. And even starting the Voice of a Survivor was never about the money. It was about the purpose. So I got this 1-bedroom unit across the road from the beach at Coffs Harbour. My office was a barbecue table out on my deck, and I had a laptop computer. I just didn't know. One thing about prison you learn, it's purposely, they make sure you know nothing about technology because they know that's the one thing that'll get you back there, and it isn't the case of a lot of people. So I went through this whole process. I had some woman turn up with a whole heap of crystals and put a chakra reading before we kicked off work. I said, I just need you to type. I've got all this work, and all these people were getting in contact. I was getting overwhelmed. I was getting 50, 60 people contact me a week on average from the word go.
So with that one A4 page that you'd written, I mean, that was really your start of your healing. That was the start 100%. Of the Voice of a Survivor. But now you're out of prison. You've actually started up what is today, had you, the Voice of a Survivor, or just a different version of it?
It started off as RJ Manser Consulting, and then I was just driving along one day. It was only 2 months after I got going.
What were people ringing you for?
They knew that through social media what I was doing.
Yep.
I was saying, listen, if anyone's suffered any abuse, but word of mouth had happened from jail. Like heaps of people knew what I was doing in jail, and people would contact me going, and one person will bring you 4, right? So one client will turn up with 4, and they were contacting me and saying, look, mate, can you put us in contact with these lawyers and everything like that? And from the word go, when I talk to a lawyer, I'll say, this is how it's going down. I don't let them call the shots. Like they call the shots from the lawyer, but how they treat my client, they'll listen to what I want to say because and I'll say, you treat my client with dignity and respect. As soon as you don't, I'll move them to another law firm. If they feel like they're just a commodity, I'll move them on without hesitation. Now I started working with I got overwhelmed. We've been going now, September, we've been going for 6 years. We've got 17,000 clients. We work with 42 different law firms nationally. But it's been tough, man.
And to strip it back, so you've gone from career criminal, because this is a bit for me like the hidden philanthropist. And why I just had to have you on it is it's like, mate, you are the shining example of just because you do bad things doesn't mean you have to be a bad person. Like there's good in everyone. And so you've now gone from a career criminal to doing amazing things. The Voice of a Survivor. What's your agenda now? I mean,
to begin the healing, to help people. My main thing is helping people the healing journey, man. Like I get so much joy. I get a lot of feedback from what I do. I've helped 17,000 people begin the healing journey. I reckon that demonstrates a lot of remorse,
100%.
So my main aim is to help to make the community a safer place. When you've got people dealing with their trauma, you've got people that are less violent. They're not breaking in your house and stealing your whatever your belongings because they don't need to get money for drugs. They start healing. But the biggest joy I get is bringing families back together and seeing the joy in a kid's face when their dad's home and their dad is available, their dad is there, their dad is healed. That's why it's not about money for me. It's about that. That's my purpose. My goal is this, right? And I said, this was the winning formula for me. When I got out of prison, I said, when I get out of prison, I'm going to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 2 years straight. And at the end of the day, I'm going to reassess. And I did it. I only had 1 day off. I stuck to that. I had some goals, some material goals. I achieved them all in record time. You know, I've always got a roof over my house, a good roof, nice car, clothes and everything like that. But I give more than I take. In saying that, the fine line is I'm not a doormat either.
What's the future look like, Voice of a Survivor?
Oh, well, just going from strength to strength. Mine's about prison reform. I just want to be a big part of healing the community.
Yeah.
I'm really big on it. I say this. If you want to reduce violence, you want to reduce drug use, you want to reduce domestic violence, you want to reduce youth crime, deal with the trauma. That's the underlying issue of it all.
And that's what this whole path now for me with the philanthropic journey I'm on is that often there is far greater joy and far greater fulfillment by actually doing something to help someone else rather than taking.
I'm about teaching people. The old analogy, you know, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach a man a fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. That's that. I'm all big on that. Really want to get involved in the prisons and just teaching people life skills. Technology is massive. I remember I came out of jail and I got approved to study law for the University of Southern Cross. I had to defer because of the technology. One thing an abuse survivor or anyone who's suffered significant trauma is you don't want them to feel stupid. You don't want them to feel embarrassed. And I was doing that a lot. I was feeling so stupid and so embarrassed about not being smart enough. And I was sitting in there with 18, 9-year-old kids. I just didn't feel up to it. But I just, doing a lot of things. I get out of bed, I write a gratitude list, I write my intentions. And my intentions for the day ain't about me, they're about other people. Always make sure that my intentions for the day ain't about me.
You've changed significantly. Has the system changed?
No, it's gotten worse. It's going backwards.
So you can help the people that are affected by this system. Is there a way to fix the system?
Oh, 100%.
But I mean, there
it's
is
monetary.
a way, but is it going to happen?
No, it's not. Not in my lifetime. Not in my lifetime, unfortunately. But people, I'll tell you what was a big win for this whole thing was COVID. People go, why? And you say, well, people know being locked in your house is punishment enough.
You mentioned before that you love telling a story. You tell your story really well.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing it with me, man.
Thank you, man.
It's been an honour.
I love being here.
To learn more about the art of giving back in whatever way you can, visit our website andrewpurdie.com.au and follow us on Instagram, The Hidden Philanthropist. Thank you for listening to The Hidden Philanthropist podcast, proudly presented by the Purdie Foundation.